Hey everybody. I talked to you last week about the Burger Cuda. I'm going to try and do something like this every week or so, or as I see things that interest me on the internet. In the automotive industry, racing industry, whatever, we'll sit down and we'll talk about them, and I'll give you all an opportunity to tell me how you feel about it. I'll tell you what I found on the news going forward. It may be one topic, it may be a couple topics. The topic this week is Ford and the things that are going on that the Ford CEO has said and the way the UAW, the United Auto Workers Union, has responded. So today is Friday the 16th. Yesterday on the 15th, the Ford CEO, a man by the name of Mr. Jim Farley, said in an interview that Ford would rethink where it builds vehicles and future assembly plants after last year's auto workers strike. Basically, he said that that huge strike was a watershed moment for the company and that it would basically rethink where it built vehicles. So if you don't know, Ford has two assembly plants, a stamping plant, and an engine building plant in Mexico already. It also has a plant in Ontario, Canada, where it builds F-150s, things like that, and they announced they're going to be building electric vans there. Basically, what I see from his statement is they're saying that if something like this happens again, the UAW strike or whatever, basically they're just going to take things somewhere else outside of America where they don't have to deal with the UAW. It could just be what they call saber rattling, fear mongering, or he could just be posturing for position. He might be right. Ford has talked about moving the plant out of Louisville several times, but at the same time, Ford's also building a huge plant here outside of Bowling Green area to build batteries. It's a huge plant. In return, the UAW plant, mind you, this is a local union, not the national UAW, has talked about going on strike because they say that the plant here in Louisville, they have safety issues because there is a lack of, minimum in-plant nurse staffing and ergonomic issues. So the Ford CEO said yesterday, the UAW local, which also the UAW local in Louisville is the same plant that supposedly, from what I've read, started the strike last year. It was the first plant to go on strike because that is, if you look at that as the most productive, highest dollar value plant Ford has, they make Super Duties, Expeditions, and the Mercury or Lincoln MKZ, whatever the big SUV is. So that's where their bread and butter is. They make F-250s, F-350s, their commercial vehicles, the things that Ford sell the most of, because Ford doesn't make cars anymore. So what does that mean? What does it mean to me? What's it mean to you? So here's what it means to me. So the Ford CEO has said, if the UAW strikes again or doesn't make demands, we're going to just cut the UAW out and we'll go to Mexico, we'll go to Canada, we'll go to Brazil, we'll go wherever. We'll build them in Europe like we used to with the Fiesta or whatever and ship them over. So the UAW in Louisville has said, hey, we don't like what Ford said. Here's this issue. And I know it says that this is a local union demand and they've given them a week till the 23rd or they're going to go on strike. So basically, Ford said something UAW doesn't like. UAW's biggest plant has found something, anything. This may be a real issue, I don't know. But to me, this seems like something that they have literally said, hey, here's something we can strike on, and here's something we can flex our muscle on, that if they don't have minimum nursing staff at the plant, we're going to go on strike. Okay? How important is plant nurse staffing levels to the productivity of the plant? I don't know. I don't work there. If any of you all work there or you work at a Ford plant, what is the minimum nursing? Is it 1? Is it 2? Is it 0? I didn't know they had to have a nurse on staff at the Ford plant. It's something I didn't know. Maybe they don't. Maybe they want one. Maybe that's what we don't know yet. What do you think? I feel like both sides of this issue are, I don't necessarily want to say wrong. I feel like it's a lot of bullying almost, or puffing up and being it. The Ford CEO maybe what he said wasn't right. Maybe it was very poor taste, very poor tact. He's got to think when you're the CEO of a company and you're the head of a company, everything you say and do is going to be under a microscope. And the other side of that is the union just last year won what is the biggest union contract victory of UAW ever. Some places I have read said that contract win last year was the biggest contract win for a union in the history of unions. I can't find exact numbers, but it was a huge deal. So now you've got two people wanting to stand their ground and wanting to be tough. How does it go forward? It's going to have to be very, very cautious on either side, because I see both sides of it. Ford is watching their bottom line. They're watching their profit. They're watching their margins. And they're literally saying, hey, if we can't be profitable, if we can't make enough profit, we'll just go somewhere. And the bad thing is, if Ford goes to Mexico, I really believe the quality of the vehicles will go down. The cost of the vehicles won't go down. So basically, they'll just cut the bottom dollar out and put more money in their own pockets and take it out of the pockets of our workers. And then the bad thing is the way the American public is, I feel like they would almost turn against Ford because they'd say, well, I want an American-made car. So I'm going to buy a Chevy, or I'm going to buy a Dodge or a Chrysler, There's a lot of people that are very strong union that would stick with the union and switch who they buy cars from, or trucks or whatever. The other side of that is, do you feel like the union's right to find a small issue like this at the biggest plant, like the muscle behind it, and say, hey, we're going strike because of this? Basically just, I don't want to say being petty, but trying to prove a point like, hey, we've got the power here. Because at some point, you've got to stop and think, and this is what I talked to a friend of mine about who works at the Toyota plant. This is going to be a local thing. It starts out local, but what if it keeps going? Louisville goes on strike. Then, wherever goes on strike, California, wherever, it just cascades. And the other thing to think about, too, is UAW, United Auto Workers. It's across Chrysler, Ford, and Stellantis. It's across Stellantis, Ford, and GM. What if the UAW here has a big blow up and they just say, hey, UAW is going on strike? Well, I work at GM. I don't care what the CEO of Ford says. That's my competitor. I don't want to go on strike because of something Ford said they were going to do. I don't want to go on strike and quit going to work and quit making money and quit putting food on the table for my family because the CEO of Ford said something you didn't like. So at what point do we... I'm not saying that you should not stand up for yourself and that the union doesn't have a right to strike, et cetera, et cetera. But at some point, do you stop and realize, hey, that guy's he's just fear-mongering and he's just trying to bully us. Everybody just keep working and just ignore him. If it comes down to in 2 or 3 years or 4 years, 5 years, whatever, Ford says, hey, we're going to build this new plant in Ecuador, then we can take it seriously. But the point you're at right now, I personally feel like that if you are going to, after just having that strike and getting everything you wanted, you're going to go back on strike again so soon over this because of something he said, you're just feeding him ammo. You're feeding the fire. You're giving him more reason to say these things and to possibly do these things. You kind of have to play the long game and be strategic about it because at some point there's an old saying that I've heard several times back home about eventually you'll strike yourself out of a job. If you just keep striking and striking and striking, every time somebody does something you don't like or every time something changes, eventually the company's just going to get tired of it and say, hey, we can go somewhere else and make this for cheaper. Like I said, Ford has plants in Mexico already and Canada. Chevy sent the the Blazer production down to Mexico. These companies just are reaching the point where they don't want to deal with it anymore. And it sucks because the union was a great thing for a long time, but now it's getting to the point where the companies we can do without it. So what do you think? Do you think Ford's in the right? Do you think the union's in the right? Do you kind of are in the middle and see both sides are kind of wrong, kind of right, let me know down below. So next week we'll sit down, we'll have another discussion, and we'll talk about another topic. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button.